Mm-hmm.
All right. So any questions, concerns, criticism? Put it out there.
People coming in right now still, so may want to wait a couple minutes.
Yeah, it looks like we have a few here.
Yeah.
There was one question I saw in the comments section that I can hit right now if you want, just as a time filler. It looks like it was a quickie. Just somebody asked if you need to keep the medial wall or Varus on the devices. The real answer to that comes down to the forefoot adduction. So if you're trying to stop them from going into forefoot adduction, then you'll need to keep that medial wall or use a strap with a pad to pull it over, or if it's real mild, the shoe may take care of that as well. So it's not necessarily controlling I guess it is controlling the varus, but it's really more of, if you don't stop forefoot adduction, you'll get the varus position in a lot of cases. But some of them, if it's real mild, you can just do it with just the shoe itself. Because I know the question was related to it takes up room in the shoe. So sometimes it is what it is. If it's needed, it's going to take up room in the shoe, and they're going to have to accommodate. If you don't need it, though, we always say if it's there, it's not there, get rid of it. So I hope if that one that asked that question, maybe they're on right now.
Now, this is technically the cocktail party, right?
Yeah, we're partying.
We're partying.
I didn't get my package of drinks for this hour. If any of you hold up a margarita.
Hey, it looks like Robert has a question here. In order to order a classic custom noodle, I recently called to confirm that you would take an STL file for fabrication. My question is, do you prefer a scan or a cast? It depends. So if you can't get your patient in the corrected position you really want them in, what you can do is actually take the cast and then scan directly over the cast and then send it to us that way. You just want to make sure that if you are going to do that, make sure the cast is even. Don't layer and do layer upon layer and then take the scan, because it's going to distort the measurements of the actual model. So everything we send out has basically it's a plastizote layer that's on the entire AFO. So even taking that cast over taking the scan over the cast, by adding that layer of padding, it actually takes up that room. So don't worry about that. Okay, that should work out fine.
Perfect.
Oh, we got 10 people now.
Well, somehow the cocktail party isn't the same without the cocktails. You know?
That's true. Very true.
I would imagine that somebody on this line, it is 5 o'clock somewhere, applies. So
yeah, Europe, right? Europe, Norway. Whoever's in Norway.
Right. But it is the weekend, which means at least for me, it's 5 o'clock all day long. So
There you go.
Very true.
All right.
Oh, Poland, 7 p.m.
Nice.
There we go.
Enjoy. All right. Any other questions?
Well, I have a question for
Sure.
Rich. Where's the quiz going to be available for people? Oh, Keith, doing your thing. He muted himself and he's talking.
Okay, here we go.
There we go.
So, what I thought would be the best, rather than putting it in the chat, I thought it would be the best for us to download the attendee list, everyone that attended, and then send it directly to them via email. I think that because you may have somebody that comes into the session, they don't stay, they download. We'll know everyone that attended. We'll download the list, send it directly to them via email, and then they can respond. And the email on the actual quiz, it's all it's loaded PDF so they can, pre-filled PDF so they can fill their stuff. It'll go directly to you, and then you can send that on to ABC or whatever you do at that point. I thought that would be a lot easier than trying to post. I was thinking about, do I post a link in here and then they're downloading it, then they're leaving? I thought the way it went was I thought it went really, really well.
The quiz is for American Board certification. They can get 2 hours
Exactly.
of continuing education units.
Yeah. So,
something you don't have to worry about in Poland.
No, exactly. But you may want to take it anyway and see if you get a good grade, Mal.
Mm-hmm.
Good information.
Just for fun.
The actual presentation about the event, right?
I don't know. I think Keith needs to fill out the quiz. I need to know that he knows what he's talking about.
Absolutely.
Just for fun.
Yeah, I was a little confused during your presentation.
I don't. It's funny. Whenever I take those quizzes, as I take those talks, I think sometimes they put those quizzes in there to make sure you're listening. Because sometimes I go to those talks and I think, well, I better listen because I can take a quiz after this thing.
I better pay attention.
It kind of keeps my mind from floating away sometimes, So, yeah.
I mean, I really think we're probably done with this, in my opinion. Oh wait, here we go. Got another question.
All right. If someone does not apply a full correction on a cast and wants some extra correction in the frontal plane, how do you communicate it in degrees?
Exactly, in degrees. So, you get to that sweet spot when I'm casting somebody who's got an equinovarus deformity. I'm always looking to get them in a neutral position in the coronal plane, and then as I'm lifting up the forefoot, I reach a point where everything kind of locks, and then if I go any further, the lateral, it's going to drop out laterally. So I'm going to cast them right at that point, and that point may be in a little bit of plantar flexion. I'm going to take that position and I'm going to put in a certain amount of correction. Now, if it's, let's say, 5 or 10 degrees, that's probably close enough where I can get them neutral. But if they're in, 15 or 20 degrees of plantar flexion at that point, then it becomes a judgment call of how much can I take them? How much farther can I take them? And usually, it's a guess based on experience and a feel that you're getting when you're handling that patient and seeing how tight they are. Maybe they're getting extra therapy. Maybe they're getting Botox. So you're expecting to get some improvement. So there is, an educated, experienced guess that you're taking, and you need to get that in range. It doesn't have to be spot on every time. If you're within a few degrees, you'll be in that window where it'll be successful.
My last question from here, Wade, is none of those pictures in those presentations today were my cast, were they?
No, I don't think
the ones that were rejected. If so, I'm going to blame the box and that UPS guy.
Just doing this for as long as we have.
Yeah,
it's kind of like we have a commercial in America, the Farmers Insurance, where we've seen it all. We've seen it all too when it comes to, lower extremity, the casts that come in, the deformities that we're dealing with, and it certainly keeps it interesting.
Sure. For sure. There's no other questions. I thought maybe we would all jump on a quick.
There we go.
Oh, here we go.
People were still stuck in the old chat session, so I just went on there and told them to relocate.
Awesome.
They probably thought we ran away.
Well, we kind of did.
Okay, so the rope test question there is not really a test per se. It's more of a descriptive, qualitative way of just showing your therapist of what you're trying to do here. Now, it's an interesting question because at the end of the day, you could use it with your patients to see, because I'm glad you asked this, because I did not mention this in the presentation, and that is, how do you know if you are doing too much resistance or not enough resistance? Too much resistance is a pretty easy one, especially when you're talking about somebody that has some tightness of their hamstrings, for instance, because if you pull with too much resistance, they're going to do exactly what they would do as if they were in more of that solid type of nature, which means, remember, you're going to be pulling their center of gravity behind them. So you're going to see them leaning back as if falling over, but rather they'll lean forward to get their center of gravity back into their base of support there. So it's probably more of a gauge of just trying to see, like, more of a qualitative way, not quantitative, of how much it's going to kind of take in your strut to pull, because there is a little bit of an educated guesswork there on what kind of strength of the strut. We'll go another level on this, which would be your advanced of the advanced, and that is sometimes I'll actually put a noodle in a couple degrees of plantar flexion to actually give even more preload. So by the time they come to 90 degrees at the ankle, when they put that brace on, it's actually trying to already pull them back some more. And in the same token, you could dorsiflex the AFO as well if you're talking about more of a hyperextension. So when they put that on, they're already getting resistance just standing at mid-stance at 90 degrees. So that would be a more advanced of the advanced, like I said, but you can preload these. But the rope test itself isn't really a test. It's just more of a way of description too, because I love when parents truly understand what it is we're doing and why it is we're doing it, because then you just have better understanding with the whole team is always going to lead to just a much better success. So let me know if James, if that answers your question there.
All right. It looks like Yvonne has a question too. How do you decide how stiff the strut needs to be?
Well, I can speak for myself. It is, again, as we mentioned, it's a little bit of an educated guess. Maybe Wade or one of the team can speak to the different levels of strength that exist as an options to us or choices. But I can tell you, the more, from my standpoint, if it's more of a weakness type of issue, then I can get pretty aggressive with those resistance levels. If it's something that's a little bit more of a position where they've got a lot more contraction involved, then we're talking about the more rigid you get, the more tendency is it's going to be going away from the resistance system. So the question they were talking about of grinding the strut, that's probably when we were talking about that, that's probably related to me early on calling them, asking them, hey, can I just grind that strut to make it a little bit more or less restrictive? Because I might have ordered a little bit too restrictive type of setup when I was kind of in my learning curve type of position. Again, the key to take away here is if they're a little tight in going into that crouch position, then you're not trying to pull that straight. You're just trying to give resistance as they gain range to get straighter. So they're still going to be in a crouch position. They're still going to be down with the bent knee. You may not be getting full extension at mid to late stance. It's just more of, as they take that step, it's an encouragement. It's that rope just pulling, just giving a little bit of dynamic resistance to them going further. So again, there's not a definitive answer of exactly what would be, because as we all know, we're talking about, patients, especially with spasticity. Each and every one of them are pretty unique. So,
Yvonne asked a question about if we would refabricate if the strut is not effective, and the answer is yes. We have a modification or mold fee, and that covers you if it requires a refabrication, whether it's for fit or for function, and there's no charge for that. But we're usually pretty good at getting the strut where it needs to be. Now, keep a few things in mind. None of the AFOs are weight-bearing devices. They're or I should say, they're not axially loading devices. So we're interested in controlling the limb, controlling the deformities and the mechanics, but we don't have to suspend them. So that's why we don't have a specific weight limit. But what I can tell you is this: as the dimensions get larger, so as we're dealing with, let's say, a strut that's either 14 inches and now we take it and we move it up to 15 inches, if we have the exact same layout, you would notice a huge difference in the flexibility between that 14 and 15 inch height. And that's because of the leverage. There were some questions about pediatrics and if we can make them really, really small. And we can. But it's taken us years, or it took us years, to be able to come up with the layouts that would be durable and provide the same mechanics as we were getting in the adults with the long lever arms. Now when you take that lever arm and you shrink it down to just a few inches, now you end up with stress concentration points, and it gets complicated quick. So, so it's taken a long time, or it took a long time for us to get there. But we have an understanding of the leverage, the weights, and the formula that we need to stick to in layups to accomplish a task. Now, we're not always going to be spot on, but we want to create a window that patient falls into in that successful range, and we're usually there. We also find that if once the patient acclimates to the device, it becomes almost a symbiotic relationship where the patient understands the mechanics that the device is providing them, and then they can develop a trust for the device and understand how it works with their own gait. So it doesn't have to be, the window doesn't have to be that tight. It could be this tight, and the patient, like I say, will acclimate. Any next questions? I see a few popped up.
The next one that kind of came up, do you incorporate a 4-foot rocker if tone does not allow dorsiflexion range of motion?
Interesting. So are we talking about tibial advancement, replacing that with the rocker, or are we talking about the third rocker replacing of plantar flexion? Either way, I guess, though, the answer would probably be pretty similar here is if you're lacking range of motion at the ankle, so we're not able to get tibia advancement, then you can actually putting a rocker on the shoe is again an acceptable thing, because they basically are wearing a solid ankle AFO at that position, or a dorsiflexion stop AFO, just based on the fact that they have the limited range at the ankle to be able to take advantage of the strut moving into dorsiflexion. So absolutely, any modifications you would be doing simply because of limit of range of motions that you were doing previously would still apply in this position. The key would be as they start to gain more range on that gastroc soleus group and gain more dorsiflexion, that with this design, it wouldn't be limiting. It would still just be more of resistance type setup to allow for that tibia to continue advance. I would just say that I would piggyback on top of the rocker. I would put a 4-foot rocker. I would piggyback that with, I would be doing something to gain that range of motion back at that ankle based on their R1, R2, whether that's going to be a combination of Botox injections for the R1 and some type of stretching orthosis for the R2 combined with physical therapy. I would just say that it's going to be a combination of both.
The question on splintering. I'm not sure if the composite AFOs, are they kinetic research AFOs? We shouldn't really be getting any splintering on the edges. It can happen from wear and tear, but
No, they're not. He said they're not kinetic. Maybe it's a reason for him to use kinetic.
yeah, usually we don't have that as an issue.
He uses Autobach and Allard. Well, maybe you ought to ask him.
Yeah, I can't speak for them.
Yep.
I could probably speak, Wade. I won't necessarily use any brand names with this, but I can tell you how Wade and I met each other. Wade, I don't know if you remember this. I met you. You might, but we met at a meeting, and I had walked by his booth, and it was his noodle was brand new. And I said to him, I just said in passing, I said, I've tried that strut technology with the carbon, and they just all break because the experience I had was the system I was using previous to it. I got really excited, made about 15 of them in the first month, and all 15 of them had broken. And then Wade had said to me, no, these won't break. So that's when I stopped. And that's when Wade and I said to him, I said, it'll break. They all break. And he said to me, he said, all right, well, break it then. Now, if you've been to an orthotic or prosthetic meeting, I'm usually off doing magic tricks for some big group of people somewhere. And so this is what this developed into. I started making a pretty big scene. I started beating it against this table. I leaned into it. I did everything I could with all of my weight to break it. And that was the day that I started. That I brought the noodle back to our cerebral palsy clinic. Really, at that point. So I can tell you that I don't have the splintering. I think question is valid for more of the wet lamination type of setups. Is what I've come across. That eventually they fatigue, and eventually you do see this where I'm doing some other adjustment, and all of a sudden I look down with a big old dagger splinter in the side of my finger because somewhere on the foot plate it had splintered. So I know exactly what you're talking about. Unless the only time I've ever seen a splintering on a noodle was because somebody had done when they were grinding on the noodle itself on the foot plate. They actually kind of came across the bottom or top and did as Valerie was showing, just kind of shaved the weaving, and then that's it. But that was only right there. Is that the only time I've seen that type of thing happen with this type of system? So I think it would be more of a something that had to do with more of the modification to it that led to it. So,
well, usually when a device is, aging and ultimately failing, it's going to happen from the outside, and it's going to work its way in. And so, it starts off with little micro cracks and that sort of thing. And when it's going through that deterioration process, you could have splinters coming off. But we bury all of our materials into the system, and if it's not cut by the practitioner, you're probably never going to experience that. So a lot of it has to do with how the actual layup is done and the production. Yeah, run that cool down. Dynamic response.
Well, does anybody have any other questions?
Do they not break because they have the dynamic response compared to the Blue Rocker, which just rigidity low end for the AFO? You know, this is for Yvonne Jeffries. So, you know, sometimes there's strength and flexibility. If we have a failure, and we have some crazy high-end users, you know, people who are athletic and doing very rigorous activities. Rotation comes into play, but sometimes just making the initial reaction is to say, well, if they break it, let's make it stronger. But that's not always the best path forward. Sometimes by making it more flexible, we're actually making it stronger. Now, I think what you need to do is put it into the perspective of what are the mechanics that are required by the patient. And so, you know, if they need a higher level of control, then you would probably want to make it stiffer. But if you're really not looking for that, if you're looking for durability, the answer isn't always just to add more material and make it bigger and stiffer. And you're not always going to make it more durable by doing that. However, I also got to tell you that the noodle is just incredibly resilient. There's no other strut on the planet like it. You know, we have a couple of patents on it, and it works for good reason.
And I think historically as well as with Yvonne's question there is that system did start out to try to be a dynamic type of AFO. That started out as a very flexible design. And that was the issue, was in the kind of the history there is that that those, not to particularly go with a brand, but just in general, AFOs of that sort historically were made very flexible and in this type of fashion, but it wasn't successful. They were fracturing. And so as Wade mentioned, the tendency was let's just make them more rigid and then they won't fracture. Well, but then we lost. Then we started getting into more of makes for a very, very good solid design, but didn't give us that dynamic kind of component is what it was. And that really is why, like I said, that I stopped at Wade's table that day. I don't know, Wade. I remember when it was. It was in the meeting. It was one of the academy meetings in Florida. I remember exactly the venue, and we had an upstairs and downstairs type of for the. You were right at the doorway down in the downstairs. I think it's the late '90s, but I was just for sure that anything that was going to be flexible was going to do that. So I think it was just historically that it was just a very difficult way. You know, what Wade's doing is it's a difficult thing to be able to reproduce and to do and keep that in a more flexible type of setup.
So Barry had a question on turnaround. Customs run about a week for an AFO noodle, soda, that sort of thing. Well, wishful thinking. Hold on a second. Let's ask production manager.
So it really depends upon what time of year you're trying to get everything done. Normally at the end of the year, it does take a little bit longer. So right now, custom noodles at this current moment are going through in about a week. If they're like a soda or a Valga noodle, it does take about a week and a half to 2 weeks. We offer fabrics on a lot of our devices. So a lot of times that'll take an extra day. So if you add a fabric to it, it elongates the time frame. And then, your really involved stuff like your KOs, your KAFOs, those can take anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks. So I like to give you the worst case scenario. So that's normally the max time that it takes, just so, if it does take us a full time, but sometimes we do get it out a lot quicker. So it really depends on the time of year and what you're asking for.
KFOs are running about 3 weeks. So heels, this is what we call a contoured heel cup, and it's almost like a UCBL. And this is attached to a noodle TA. It's a pediatric. But the heel cups, we can go from totally flat to nano style to what we call a contoured. Contoured is total contact, like a UCBL. And then if you really need extreme control, then we would go to something like the Soto, where you're talking about a Hemi SMO. So we can get pretty deep on the heel cup. Now, one thing, and we do offer rush services, but even at the best, these take several days to fabricate. Now, okay. So if we have a contoured heel cup, we're going to lose all the flexibility where we have that contour. That becomes very stiff, even if we don't have a heavy layup. It's because of the contours themselves that we get like an I-beam effect, and it becomes rigid. Well, what that's going to do, it's going to put the forces or the stresses into other areas of the device, namely the strut. So quite often when we're doing a contoured heel cup, we have to make the strut a little bit stiffer. Otherwise it loses a balance within the device, and the strut ends up taking all of the stress, and it also won't act properly, it won't flex properly. So in order to keep it all balanced, we may make the strut a little bit stiffer if we're going to have that contoured heel cup. How thick might the posterior strut be? Okay, if we do can you roll that up a little bit? This is for James. How thick might the posterior strut be? It depends on the strut. Okay, if it's a PLS, it's going to be a little bit thicker. It's also going to be a little bit stiffer. If it's a Soto, and I see you have CMT perhaps, chances are the Soto is really the proper design. And that's not going to be very thick at all, and it's going to actually avoid the posterior of the calcaneus. So it's really not going to make it. It's not going to take up too much room in the shoe. The PLS going posterior of the calcaneus, that's going to push the foot forward about 3/8 of an inch, and that's noticeable. That's a full shoe size. So the noodles, because they're coming to, even though they're going to the posterior, when they attach into the shoe, it's coming in from either the medial or lateral side, so it's not pushing the foot forward. It really doesn't add to the amount of room that's being taken up in the shoe. Any others? Is the fabric a design for the outside, or is it a liner or strap on? Okay, so this is for Yvonne. So when we put fabrics into our laminations, it's done very similar to the way prosthetic liquid resin lamination is done. So we will, using our same pre-preg resin, we're going to embed that as the final layer on the outside. So it is the outer layer, and it is part of the device. Now, with that in mind, in fact, here, this is a good example. This is the black and white fiber. I don't know if you can really see it that well, but the white is not truly white. All right. The reason that is the carbon fiber is so black, and this material is so thin, we can't really mask the blackness of the carbon fiber, so it will show through. That's why we recommend darker colors or fabrics that will hide. This is black and white, it looks great. But if we were to try to do, and we do a Caucasian, but it's not as pretty. But, this is what looks really great. Right? That's the black with some blue, and it can hide that carbon very, very well without making it too thick. Because if we make the material thick, we start losing the properties that we're looking for. Here's another one from James about options for valgus. All right. So if your foot is in valgus, it would be, if you used a Soto design, it would be a lateral strut with a medial hemi SMO. And that could be done. We do it all the time.
Hey, Wade, I'm going to share my screen real quick. I pulled up a slide for that picture. Let me see if I can hit this real quick for us for the valgus one. So bear with me for just a second. Here we go. It should pop up now.
Okay. Hey, Barry,
and
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Keith. Finish up.
Yeah, no, it's good. James, this is. Can you guys see that screen? That picture there. Mm-hmm. So it's the little picture on the left there. So there's three components on that pronation that you're after controlling, and that's what Wade's talking about with the Soto. Is it's the placements of those 3 points of pressure. So you've got to stop the hindfoot valgus. That's going to come through the wedging of a foot orthotic UCBL or SMO, kind of advantage either as an add-on to the noodle or as built into the Soto. Then you've got to stop that midfoot collapse with a good ST push, so a good push under that sustentaculum tali there. That's the number 2. And then the third component is that forefoot abduction. If that forefoot just slides off out into lateral space there, like they stand up on your whatever design you're using of an AFO, and the forefoot's completely off the brace, that's where that third point comes into play. And that's where, like, the strength of the Soto, or again, a hybrid design, allows you to stop that forefoot abduction. So before I do anything, I do look at the coronal and transverse planes, and that is saying, okay, what am I going to need first to control this foot and this ankle? And it's going to be a combination of those three things and that 3-point pressure system right there in that picture to prevent pronation. Now, then I adapt that over to, as Wade said, the Soto, or as we mentioned in the presentation, a hybrid type of a design, because this, again, that I showed in the presentation, that is not an uncommon type of foot and ankle that I have to use with a patient that is a diplegic type of patient, for instance.
Cool. Barry, get in touch with us we'll be happy to send you up a sample. You won't have to return it. I do 2-stage castings for CAFOs. I don't do it for AFOs. I've never found the need.
Hey, James, one last thing, too, on that pronation. I just went back and looked at your question. If you're not getting enough out of the wedging, so I'm going to propose a question to the group that's on here right now. Just think for a second, because I use this in my presentations, and 99% of people get this answer wrong. So just think for a second here is, if I put an SMO on somebody that pronates, so the one that comes just above the ankle, and I tell you they have hindfoot valgus and pronation, you can either keep the lateral wall above the ankle or you can keep the medial wall, that little ear that goes up above. Because those need to hit. One of those is going to hit their leg to control pronation. The majority of people say, I want to keep that medial wall up really high above the ankle. Wade had mentioned the importance of 3 points of pressure. It's actually the opposite. It's going to be, as we mentioned, it's going to be that lateral wall that you need. So people get that wrong all the time. I see them come into clinics. They've cut it off. They've flared it completely out, where in essence, it needs to be a point of pressure. Let me pull up again that, to give you kind of, you remember that picture of that really hyperpronated foot. If you were to see that, let me look at my presentation, see if I can find that. There it is. I'm going to share this real quick with you again so that you can see that lateral wall up above the ankle is actually what is actually hitting. So let's do that real quick. I'm going to share that again so you can see it. Okay, if you look at that picture closely, it's the lateral wall that's hitting, and the medial side doesn't hit, right? It's a left foot. Which side on that wall above the ankle? It's a true 3 points of pressure system. So if you're not getting it with enough wedging, then that's when. That's the question when therapists ask, well, why did you use an SMO versus UCBL? Well, there's the answer right there, because I needed to be able to grab above the ankle on the lateral side, right above the lateral malleolus, to complete my 3 points of pressure to prevent the pronation. So hopefully that, James, that answers it for you.
Anna, we learn every day, and we keep learning every day, every one of us.
Exactly.
When you stop learning, it's all over.
For sure. I think we could pretty much wrap up. What do you think?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for attending, Keith. Thanks for being part of it. Really enjoyed listening to your presentation. It was awesome.
I think everything went really well. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Absolutely. We really appreciate you taking a Saturday afternoon or evening, wherever you're at, and joining us. I sent you guys, Val, I just sent you and Keith. Okay, cool. All right, talking to you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.